So please join me in welcoming Taylor, who will also tell us some more about our final panelists.
All right. Thanks, Steve. That was great. This has been a great conference. I think we'll have many opportunities to applaud Steve and company later, but this has really been great. I'm really happy to be a part of it, coming from the Boulder campus and coming from the Benson Center. So our topic today, I'm going to introduce the panelists in just a second, but I wanted to say just a few things about the topic. So academic freedom and the mission of the university. When I got to, or when, I'm an economic historian, and I was thinking about academic freedom and like what it means to me in like the work that I do, like in the classes that I teach and the research that I do or might do. And in 1974, Robert Fogel and Stan Engerman published a book, Time on the Cross. A kind of, Robbie yesterday mentioned Eugene Genovese as a famous economic historian of American slavery. And Fogel and Engerman wrote this book, Time on the Cross, that I think you couldn't write today. I think that if the book was a criticism of what Genovese was writing, and they were pilloried in the press, in academia, for a kind of economist characterization of what the institution of American slavery was like. Any number of people from all over the political spectrum thought that they were wrong. And I think actually over the course of the last 50 years, they've been proven to be wrong in many ways by their own colleagues in economic history. They did so from perches at the University of Chicago, at Harvard University, from the University of Rochester. And I think they couldn't write that book from those places today. Maybe the University of Chicago is the exception to that. And I think that that's why we have this panel. Like, what is the mission of the university? For example, to discover something new about the way that American slavery worked, right? But you can't do that. They couldn't have done that without academic freedom, right? Without being able to pursue their interests in an important topic without fear of being fired, without fear of professional damage. Robert Fogel, he's fine. He went on to win a Nobel Prize. So with that, I think we have a panel here who has both kind of research experience and personal experience that overlaps with the mission of the university and academic freedom and what it means today. So I'm going to introduce them and then give them a chance to talk about some of this. So Michael Polyakov is the president of the American Council of Trustees and Alumni. He has a PhD in classical studies and was previously faculty at Wellesley and Hillsdale. He's served in kind of public and private positions. Deputy Secretary for Post-Secondary and Higher Education in Pennsylvania, Director of the Division of Education Programs at the National Endowment of the Humanities, and Vice President, I guess, Colorado, Vice President for Academic Affairs and Research at the University of Colorado System. I was trying to do a little bit of work on what else he's done, and I came across this, so I'm going to say it. He's the author of Combat Sports in the Ancient World, as well as many other things. Maybe that is related to the topic of this, but as well as many other books more directly related to higher education, civic education, curriculum, and academic freedom. Martha McCoy is a special assistant to the University of Wyoming president, where they have a bunch of interesting things going on up in Wyoming, kind of on these topics. She has a PhD in sociology, was formerly tenured in departments at Virginia Tech and Appalachian State. She's the author of The Caveman Mystique, Pop Darwinianism and Debates Over Sex, Violence, and Science. As well as, and I was also doing some work on Martha and doing some background research on Martha, as well as Real Knockouts, the Physical Feminism of Women's Self-Defense. And if you wanted like a podcast rendering of this, she's on a podcast with somebody from the Martial Arts Studios or something like that. It was like, I think I could never be on that, but there Martha is, and she was. Alexandra Lysova is a professor in the School of Criminology at Simon Fraser University in Canada. She studies intimate partner violence in Russia and Canada, and more recently has works focused on men's experience with intimate partner violence, including victimization, help-seeking behavior, and issues involving children. She is active, oh, no, I'm gonna say something about everyone with that. And then finally, George Yancey is a professor of sociology at Baylor University. He's published lots of articles on institutional racial diversity, racial identity, academic bias, progressive Christians, and anti-Christian hostility. And he has several books kind of on that constellation of topics, including Compromising Scholarship, What Motivates Cultural Progressive, There Is No God, and So Many Christians, So Few Lions. So, with that, I have a question for all of you, but to motivate the question, I wanted to talk about one part of the title for this event, the mission of the university. So you can look this up for the University of Colorado. And it says, the University of Colorado is a public research university with multiple campuses serving Colorado, the nation, and the world through leadership in high-quality education and professional training, public service, advancing research and knowledge, and state-of-the-art healthcare. My question, there's some guiding principles, it goes on a little bit more, but my question is, what is the mission of the university? Would each of you tell us, like, kind of, how would you amend that kind of somewhat dry definition? How would you amend that, or how would you change that, from your perspective, from the perspective of your different institutions, from the perspective of, who you are from your fields? Michael?
I think I will steal a phrase from Max and Hedvig Born. Max Born, of course, won the Nobel Prize in Physics. Uncompromising, indefatigable pursuit of truth. And they go on to say, is what separates the scientist from the charlatan. So we could leave off that last phrase, the indefatigable, uncompromising pursuit of truth. And I would also suggest, take a look at the mission statement of the new University of Austin and see how they incorporate the idea of the unlimited freedom of the mind in the pursuit of truth.
Well, this is not the University of Wyoming's mission, but which is something like we unlock the extraordinary in every individual and so forth. But I would say that the mission or purpose that I think almost all universities have in common is simply the discovery and dissemination of knowledge.
Oh yeah, I agree. The university mission of Simon Fraser University, we don't really have that one. That's interesting because we are kind of pushed the university to create one. But overall, through the purpose they have there, it's advancement of knowledge. It's absolutely, it's obtaining new knowledge. It's translating this knowledge to the students, to the community, based on principles of academic freedom, open inquiry, intellectual pluralism. The only thing I'm concerned is that when I see these wonderful missions on so many university websites, and then the reality on the ground, and this is where I see a big gap. And that worries me is that mission is wonderful, and it can be all these beautiful words, but what is important, how it is implemented. And Robert mentioned yesterday Soviet constitution. Oh, it was perfect. It was perfect. Perfect language. Did it work? No. So that is why the same with the mission. We have wonderful, if it just can be advancement of knowledge and serving the communities, but it should work.
Yeah, so I'm going to go on with everyone else that I think one of the primary missions of the university is knowledge creation, knowledge discovery. I'll go a step further in that it's also to disseminate the knowledge and also to teach people how to acquire the knowledge, which of course would require them, teaching them how to engage in critical thinking skills. So I'll leave it right, that's all good for right now. We can talk about whether they're doing it in a little bit.
Michael?
I just want to add one interesting factoid. ACTA has this site that we've created. It's free, called howcollegesspendmoney.com. And if you get on the site with a few keystrokes, we import all the information from the National Center on Education Statistics. I thought I ought to look at the universities, the campuses in the UC system. And most of you guys do pretty well in terms of the ratio of instructional spending to administrative spending, but curious thing jumped out. I looked at student services for Boulder, and you're way above peer average spending. Now, I'm not saying that all of those services are unimportant, but it is something to keep in mind. What is the university? What is its mission? Is it social engineering? Is it making people feel good about themselves? What exactly is it? Asking that as a kind of Platonic question. Esti, what is it? And I come back to the indefatigable, uncompromising pursuit of truth. There are many things that an academic community can be, but there's only one thing that is unique to the academic community.
Great. So the next question I'm going to pose to all of you, but I think your different experiences will provide some interesting insight. So moving on to academic freedom, you all got your PhDs in different places and different times. You teach at different universities that have different, that might have different missions, that have a religious component to their mission. I wonder, over the course of your career, career in North America, career before North America, how has your understanding of academic freedom changed? Maybe your own understanding, but also what you see in your colleagues and the communities around you, as it relates to your university's ability to pursue the missions that you guys articulated. George, do you want to?
Sure. So I'm the one you're looking at when you said at a religious school. So yes, Baylor is a religious school. Here's an interesting thing. And I actually did some research because I was curious about Protestant campuses and these sort of things. And one thing I've discovered, and I think it's true at Baylor as well, is that when it comes to political issues, Protestant schools actually tend to be more freeing than state schools. That they tend to allow for more variety of opinions. When it comes to theological issues, it's the opposite. So, if you want to be an atheist, where I used to be at University of North Texas, no one cares. At Baylor, we wouldn't hire an atheist, and we would, they could be students, but we wouldn't hire one. So I think that religious schools, they're not perfect by no means, but actually when it comes to political issues, they actually, people think Baylor, they're all conservatives. Actually, no. We run the whole spectrum. We have conservatives, we have far leftists on our faculty, so we have a lot of diversity politically at our campus.
I would say academic freedom is a very personal question for me. So I was born and grew up in Soviet Union, and I entered the university in the far east of Russia in Vladivostok shortly after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So, and at that time, of course, during the Soviet time, there was no academic freedom in Soviet institutions. It's just not such a concept, really. It's all controlled by the state. It's all accredited by the state, and they just preparing the loyal citizen, loyal patriotic citizen to their country, ready to die for the country. And then, of course, in the 90s, we had this wonderful moment, opportunity. I really had hope that we will build a better country. We will move on to some, to have connections to the rest of the world. And then in 2000, when Vladimir Putin, the president who is still a president, came to the office. And this is what happened. I was a professor at the university in Vladivostok. I was teaching there sociology. And that experience gave me a lot. So in that 10 years before I left Russia in 2010, it was the time when I've noticed that something's changing. And the point is that I think the best rule is the one we don't notice, and when we don't really ask questions, because everything is allowed, you can do things, nobody tells you what to study, what questions to ask, you just do your job. And then slowly but surely, I've noticed that there were questions. So why do you teach this? Why do you talk to the students about that? And then when I questioned this, when I resisted, then I had a call from the KGB. So that's Federal Security Services in 2009. Again, honestly, I believe they didn't exist anymore. I believed it's from the past, like they're no longer there. And all of a sudden, here they are, asking questions if I have access to the state information. Why do I study domestic violence, and why do I get these statistics here in Russia? Why do I travel to the United States? I was a Fulbright scholar at New York University in sociology department in 2003 and 4. So why do you go there? What kind of data do you bring with you? It was very unpleasant communication. And I realized that that's it. I'm in their file. They will not let me go anymore. They will be watching me. And in 2010, we left, my husband and I, we left Russia. And the point is that to me, it's so personal because I left only for the political reasons. I'm leaving everything behind, my career, apartment, a car, which we value so much. If you just got that in Russia, it's already a big deal. And then we left, and we chose Canada. It's easy to immigrate. It's a clear process. You just go easy and get passport. And then, of course, I'm enjoying this idea of freedom. I'm studying my topic, and I have no concerns. And then, around 2015, especially after 2020, I'm feeling something. And the point is that I'm just like a déjà vu process for me. Like I've experienced this in Putin's Russia, when there were these concerns, oh, don't say that, oh, don't mention this. And then in 2020 specifically, all these people sitting there and somebody coming and telling us what to say, what not to say, what to study. And to me, it was like, I can't just believe it, like a bad dream is coming back again. And it's not just me. All my colleagues I know from former Soviet Union, we kind of contacted each other and saying, is it happening? Are we in the situation again, going over again to authoritarianism right now in academia? So yes, they felt the same way. It's not just me going crazy. I joined Heterodox Academy in 2021 to simply get some psychological support that it's really happening. Just I need somebody to see it's not me crazy. So this is where, and the question was academic freedom. So it's personal, and the point is, at that time the question was, where do we immigrate again? Where do we go again? Or we stay and fight. And we made the choice, we stay and fight. My 2 kids were born in Canada. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe this is time. I ran from Russia and I felt bad about it. I knew if I stayed, maybe I would end up like Alexei Navalny on one of them. It's hard. It's hard to resist when the sanction will be, you go to prison. Like, it's serious. Like, fear is serious there, right? But here, and my idea was, I'm in the West now. I'm here, the people cherish value academic freedom, freedom of expression. It's protected in the laws here, right? So we stayed and we fight, and we're still fighting. And the point is, it's personal to me, but I'm fighting. I'm ready to do that. I see the instruments for that. There are tools for that. But I'm still impressed and shocked by my colleagues. And I think my experience from authoritarian Russia gives me kind of sensitivity to this topic. Like, I'm sensitive, I feel it when it's coming. And my colleagues sitting there quietly and saying, no, they just told you, just say it, land acknowledgement, just say it, why do you care? Or just go to the training, just do it. It's okay, just a little step. It's not a little step. You do this step, you do next step, and then you find yourself in an authoritarian state. You don't do these steps, you recognize them early. These are warning signs, red flags, you treat them seriously, you resist right away before it's too late. It happens in Russia in the 2000s. We didn't resist that much. Okay, just do this concession, do this politely in Canada, politely you do this, you don't disagree. In Canada, any disagreement is seen as, oh, you're not polite, oh, you're too direct, oh, you're too aggressive. We don't question those things. And to me, it's a social trap. It's kind of cowardice to sit there quietly while you disagree. So that is why some of us, I co-founded an academic freedom group at Simon Fraser University. And this is what we do. It's about 60 professors right now. So we kind of strengthen. We write the letters to the university, to the president, we're members of Senate, like myself. We join Senate. We're doing work, we just want to be there. And the first was fear. And I remember asking my colleagues, what exactly are you afraid of? And of course, losing your job. This is the scariest thing. I mean, nobody really goes to prison in Canada or in the United States, but losing your job. But then if it's losing your job, it's rare. Like, this is this exaggerated fear. Mostly it's about colleagues. Oh, people will not treat me the same way. Oh, it's this. But are you ready to pay? There will be price for you speaking up. So that it is. Some people will turn away. They will not be your friends. But there is price for you to speak honestly and to speak to be true to yourself. So that is why we're kind of trying to wake up people and saying, fight, fight, fight. Democracy is a fragile thing. Academic freedom is fragile. It shouldn't be taken for granted. It's something that is not just given to us. We constantly fight for that. And that is why, Shaila, what you just said today, it's so important. I think it's a matter of individual professors to really be brave. And I so much appreciate the talk here. It's amazing, it's excellent. But to me, it's like a next step. Civics education is a next step, how to prevent what happened here in the past 10 years, how to prevent it from happening again. Preparing people to be ready for the debate, to be ready to go and simply talk, I disagree, and not to be afraid. So, but it's a next step, but how do we do that with people already in place? And I think Greg from the FIRE mentioned yesterday that these younger faculty members are particularly scared. And students are scared. What do we do today with this body of people already in place who are afraid and self-censor themselves? And I think the idea would be is just to support the idea of courage, something that we talked about yesterday. Courage is important, to support controversy, to award people who ask difficult questions, students who ask difficult questions, to make it not just, okay, you can do this work, no, actually encourage and make it kind of a value, right? You actually go there courageously and you saying things because that is what is expected of you in academia, just to kind of help with that. So I think this is this thing, and fight a couple of other things that were kind of known from the Soviet time as well. Just leave me alone. That's another position. Just leave me alone. I'll just teach my course. I'll just write my book. No, it doesn't work that way. If you just say it, leave you alone, then they will come for you. Then they will not be able to do your job in a couple of years, in 5 and 10 years. Because whenever there's gap in power, they will come there. They see it as weakness. If you constantly do not resist, they see it as weakness, right? And of course, fear and politeness. These are the things that need to be clearly considered and challenged. Thank you.
Martha, academic freedom.
Okay. Well, I wasn't planning to tell this story, but I think I will. I got involved with thinking about academic freedom during my years as a baby professor at Virginia Tech. It was my first job out of grad school. Although my PhD was in sociology, my first tenure track position was in women's studies. Those are now called gender studies, but at the time it was women's studies. And we faced a lot of criticism, not from our colleagues on campus, but from the outside groups that were sort of investigating women's studies programs. And I found myself in the position of having to defend our scholarship, which I thought really was a legitimate scholarship. We were making our case with evidence and doing nerdy scholarship like everyone else. Again, I was a sociologist, one of my colleagues was a biologist, another was a historian. We were trained by regular disciplines, and we were doing our regular work. But groups that would engage in Freedom of Information Act requests, like the Independent Women's Forum, for example, would find our syllabi and make a lot of assumptions and come to a lot of conclusions about what terrible things we were doing. They said we were teaching our students to be lesbians and to hate marriage and all these things that we would shrug our shoulders and we didn't even understand where they were getting this idea. But at the same time, that was sort of a blessing in a way because it forced me to think about what my role was as a faculty member, how it was perceived, not just by my students, but by all kinds of onlookers. And I took my responsibilities very, very seriously. And so I was just sort of forced to articulate what I did as a scholar. And it made me realize as well how important it was to be really transparent about why these readings were on my syllabus, why students were being given particular assignments, and what the point of the class was. Suffice to say, it was not to indoctrinate them into any political agenda, but it was something that a lot of people assumed, and so it was, again, it was sort of a gift. And then, because a group of students on the Virginia Tech campus at the time spray painted some anti-rape graffiti on buildings and sidewalks. The police assumed I was involved, like some kind of ringleader. I wasn't at all involved, but they seized and searched my computer and all the files without a warrant, and that was one of the first cases like that, which I think was a Fourth Amendment violation, but that's another story. So that's when I joined the AAUP. You know, that's when it got real for me, where I felt like I needed the support of an organization that stood up for professors and their academic freedom, and I was actually really worried about the ways in which a lack of computer privacy would compromise academic freedom and our ability to share the results of our research or even conduct our research. So that became a big event for me, and I got very involved with the AAUP. And so I was fortunate enough then to read a lot of the AAUP materials and get involved at all levels of the AAUP. And I think it's important to remind everyone that the AAUP doesn't just say that faculty have rights to teach their material and do their research, share their research, and have freedom in intramural and extramural utterances as well. But there are a series of responsibilities that go along with those rights. And over the years, I do think a lot of faculty members have lost that sense of what the responsibilities are. You have a responsibility, for example, to stay on your area, in your area of expertise. If I'm teaching a women's studies class, I don't go on about something going on with climate change or in chemistry or something I know nothing about. And I would hope that the chemistry professors are not going on about things that they don't know anything about, and talking about, moral and political issues outside of our area. So I think that there are a lot of responsibilities that we have to remember that we have, but I have seen a lot of faculty members lately talk as if academic freedom is a sword and not a shield. And I really try to emphasize that academic freedom does not give us permission to be political activists in class or in our research, but actually is very much a shield against undue influence from religious groups, political activists, wealthy donors, or whoever might be trying to influence what we teach or influence how we do our research or what conclusions we come to. So for me, really thinking about the responsibilities associated with academic freedom have been important, and that's why I've been I've been harping on this for a few years, really against scholars who fancy themselves scholar activists, because it's absolutely, I think, a violation of the responsibilities of academic freedom. You don't have the freedom to, in your paid time, as part of your job, be an activist. If you want to be an activist as an ordinary citizen, go ahead. Or as Stanley Fish said in the title of his book from many years ago, save the world on your own time. I think that's great. I think activism is great. I love activists. I think the world needs them. I've taught a class on activists as an object of inquiry, but I think that we really have to be more careful about where we draw these boundaries. And I think a lot of scholars out there now think their job is to be activists, and we have to be careful when we talk about teaching people about democracy and citizenship, because the scholar activists will say, okay, I'll do it, and you won't be able to trust them. I think it's undermining the public trust in higher ed.
So I want to come back to the issue of activism a little bit more, but before we do that, Michael, can you talk to us a little bit about your experience with academic freedom?
And really do want to continue that conversation because it's so vital. I am very bothered that AAUP never really got Committee B going on professional responsibility. This has been one of the deficits that's turned around to bite us. But I actually even wanted to start with a little thank you for the privilege of being here in this magnificent place. I came here in 2007, chosen by the inimitable Hank Brown. And when Hank retired, I actually told him I felt I should have been paying him tuition to work as his vice president. It was a wonderful experience. And one of the things that Hank asked me to do was to work on an intellectual diversity resolution that actually made its way into Regents' laws, that politics and religion would be recognized as things that needed to be protected as much as race and ethnicity and so forth. And the regents actually unanimously passed that, and then they did an even stronger version of it a few years later. But Hank said, go and talk to all the faculties and make sure that they have a chance to respond. And when he sent me out to Boulder, he said, don't get into a fight with them, just listen. And I felt like a punching bag, but he was absolutely right, because the press coverage of it showed just how hostile these people were to the idea of intellectual diversity and freedom. But getting to my pleasure at being with UCCS again, I went and talked to the Colorado Springs faculty, and they had a very quizzical expression. Well, why do you possibly need to ask us? That's of course right. That's what we want. And so the resolution went through, happy ending. But getting to my point, I gave a very dour title to my talk today, the wasteland of academic freedom. And so I want to temper that a little bit, channeling Brother Cornell. Hope, faith, and love. It's often mistranslated in the King James and other versions of the Bible as charity. No, it's agape, it's love. Faith, hope, and love. We cannot lose our moorings and our direction. And so I'm going to be, Alexandra, a little bit more hopeful ultimately. What does it mean? What does academic freedom mean in an echo chamber? And just to give us a little bit of levity, I brought along a friend here. Let me see if I can pull her up. Maybe I should stop there. She's so much better at it than I am.
So,
But
yeah, sure, yeah.
what's the point when the whole process of bringing in new professors or tenure and promotion is so skewed in an echo chamber that just replicates itself? So we've got some real hard work to do. And yesterday, Robbie George, whom I revere, said to me very gently, well, now you've touched the third rail, when I raised the whole issue of how faculty selection goes on. And so I'll throw this out in the interest of our free discussion. It's not okay, given what we understand about confirmation bias, to have a search committee made up entirely of Caucasian males. That was something that we did in the past. Why is it okay to have a total lack of ideological diversity? The conservatives, the classical liberals, especially when we're searching for, say, new economists or new political scientists. This process has to change. Boards of regents, governors, visitors, trustees, whatever you want to call them, have an obligation to get on top of this and to build real intellectual diversity. Boulder's better than Harvard in that it's got, last I looked, about 8-9% self-identifying conservatives. Harvard only has 2%. That doesn't happen by chance. Let's get real here. And now I've occasionally heard, I think, Josh Dunn, you've chronicled some of this, the sneering argument, well, that's because conservatives aren't that smart. They can't make it into the academy. They can't make it through the search process. I beg to disagree. And then an even more absurd argument, well, they're all interested in making money, so they don't want to be in the academy. And that just seems the analog of, well, the reason we don't have so many women in the C-suites in corporations is that they want to be on the mommy track, so it's nothing that we're doing wrong. Let's get over it. Let's change this. If we want academic freedom, let's have a place where there really is a diversity of opinion and views, and nothing left to lose, as Janis Joplin sang so beautifully. Actually, it was Chris Christopherson who wrote that, but Janis gave us the best version.
So, great. Yeah, so So Martha and George, I'll start with George. I wanted to ask about what people do with academic freedom, what people think they're doing with academic freedom, and then ultimately like what the consequences of what they might be doing with it, rightly or wrongly. And so for George, the prompt next to your name on the program suggests something about the relationship between making advancements in terms of how we understand some field, advancing knowledge, the mission of the university, and academic freedom. I think the word science was used, but I think progress can also be made in the humanities and social sciences. And I wonder, tell us something about that relationship, or how do those things relate?
So what I prepared was discussing, what it costs to not have academic freedom. And so why don't I go ahead and go into that. So I'm going to say something that at first may be controversial, and then maybe later on is still controversial. But sometimes total ignorance is better than half-truths. And let me illustrate what I mean by this. Everyone here has heard about Christian nationalism, right? How could you have not heard about Christian nationalism, especially in 2016? Why did social scientists get so interested in Christian nationalism in 2016? One word, Trump. Okay, so there's all sorts of articles on Christian nationalism academically, that it's been on CNN and MSNBC, Christian nationalism, Christian nationalism, Christian nationalism. You read the articles, there's nothing good about Christian nationalists. They are xenophobic, they are homophobic, they're intolerant, that they can't quickly think. All the academic articles, I've yet to find an academic article on Christian nationalism that says, hey, they're not that bad of a people. All right, so one of the things that has been tied to them is that they're fear-based. Their fears drive their attitudes. Okay, so there's some articles that they're fear-based. I was fortunate that I got access to a data set. And in this data set, it had a question. And the question was, do any of these groups a threat to the unity of the country? So fear, threat, people don't like to answer questions, say, I'm afraid, but they'll say they're a threat, which is kind of the same thing. So I decided to use a scale, and just a little aside here, I have some problems with the scale being used, but I'll put that to the side. I used a scale in the survey, and I identified white Christian nationalists because really the discussion today has moved away from Christian nationalism to white Christian nationalism. And I looked at this question, and I saw all the different groups, and I found 4 groups that more than 25% of these white Christian nationalists said that they were very much a threat to the country. Immigrants, Democrats, LGBTQ, and I knew I was going to forget the 4th group. I knew the Muslims. Okay. So 4 groups. I said, the highest was Democrats. 39% of them said that they were very much a threat to the country. If you look at the immigrant one, about 28.9% say they're very much a threat to the country. And I did a regression to show that their feeling threatened by immigrants was correlated among these white Christian nationalists to adopting the sort of white replacement conspiracy, the fear that whites are being replaced by immigrants. By golly, it's all true. What they say about Christian nationalists is true. But then I didn't stop there. I said, is this true about Christian nationalists, or is this true about people in general? So I looked at the group that you think be most likely unlike the Christian nationalists, which is white progressives who are educated. So I got a group, whites, who had at least a bachelor's education, who were politically progressive. So I looked at that group, and I took them through all the groups. And only 2 groups was there more than 25% of them show threat. Those 2 groups were Republicans and conservative Christians. 60% of them saw Republicans as very much a threat. 62% of them saw conservative Christians as very much a threat. So even though there's only 2 groups, much higher than the Christian nationalists. Playing around with some regression analysis, and yes, that attitude is connected to social attitudes. So what we have here is an academia where people are afraid to look at white progressives. They're afraid, because we've learned there's certain things you can't study. Afraid to look at white progressives. And yet, so the message is out, these Christian nationalists, they are uniquely fearful inside of their attitudes. But that's not the truth. The truth is, what I think it is that human beings tend to have fear attached to their attitudes. Now, when you only look at half the truth, what do you get? These people should be outcasts. Look at them, they're fear-based. Because of this fear, they want to drive out immigrants, they want to drive out blacks, they want to drive out all this sort of stuff. But what the truth is, and this is what I say, sometimes half-truths are worse than ignorance. We'd be better off if we were ignorant about this than the half-truth. The full truth is that this is, in my opinion, and I'm trying to write this up for an article, this is something that is common among humans, especially humans who are activists. Academic freedom prevents us from getting the full truth. Sometimes partial truths are okay, but sometimes they can actually cause more danger. And so if we want to think about what academic freedom does to the sciences, if science is about learning truth, as it was said, it's about learning knowledge, then we got to be able to ask questions about everything. And if I run this study and I found out that the white educated progressives, only 10% of them considered Christians as a threat, then that is information that we should need. And then maybe it is true about white Christian nationalists. But right now, the conclusion I've come from is a different conclusion. And finally, I only picked one quality. I mean, I don't have time to look at all the qualities. I mean, there's like, I think 100 people doing articles on Christian nationalism today. So I can't look at all of them. But I do wonder now about some of the other things. If we contextualize examinations correctly, are white Christian nationalists more intolerant than African Americans, than white education progressives? If we look at the groups that they are intolerant towards, we won't know until we actually look at that. Academic freedom is necessary if we want to get the full truth.
So Martha, I want to turn to you now, and I want to frame my question a little bit in the context of some things that have been brought up. So a few people have brought up Ron Daniels' What We Owe Democracy, and I often hear democracy. I mean, I think at one point at all the meetings that chancellors and provosts go to, it's kind of like they all colluded and said, like, let's all talk about democracy and like why democracy is good. And I think it's actually good to talk about democracy being good. Like collusion about maybe not. But I think it relates a little bit to kind of how academic freedom or whatever gets used to sometimes do activism. And I wondered if you could say something about that and sort of the relationship between how academic freedom is used and maybe what that leads to in terms of activism.
Okay, yeah, I think that, so as I alluded to, I think that it's an abuse of the concept of academic freedom to presume that that means you have the freedom to do whatever you want, to take over your chemistry class and talk about a war going on instead, or to not follow the evidence where it leads, but to lead with your political goals or project. So I think that in general, scholar activism is something we should rein in. I think there are ways we can do that as faculty members who sit on committees and do peer reviews of people's teaching and annual reviews and promotion and tenure committees. There's all sorts of ways in which we can remind people of what academic freedom means. I realize not everyone agrees with me. There are people who defend scholar activism. And interestingly enough, a lot of people who I have read and heard defending scholar activism defend it on the grounds that the university is supposed to advance democracy, and that's what I'm doing. So they see themselves as saving or advancing democracy by pursuing a political project in and through their scholarly work and in their classrooms. So I think that's why I want us to be careful, because we could have all the universities could change their mission tomorrow and say our mission really is going to be civic and we're going to teach about citizenship. That would be great. But if you're not careful about what it means to teach and what kind of inquiry is going to go on, and we don't distinguish between inquiry and activism, then I think we're just going to further undermine the public trust in higher ed.
Yeah, Michael, do you want to say something on that?
I actually completely agree that without heterodoxy in the academy, the force of academic freedom can be something that's really deleterious. I know that sounds paradoxical, but let's think about Princeton in 2020 when 350 members of the faculty sign a letter that includes a demand that Princeton faculty have a committee that would review everything, including the publications of professors, and discipline them if they found any evidence of racism in their publications or their teaching. And one man named Joshua Katz said, "This is outrageous," as is the idea that there would be things that violate civil rights laws, giving special privileges to certain members of the faculty. Well, what happens to poor Joshua Katz? I think you probably know the story. The whole faculty turns on him. The graduate students won't work with him. Eisgruber wants to start an investigation, and then he's stopped because they did sign the Chicago Principles, at least stopped temporarily. So freedom of speech worked for a bit, but there were hardly any voices on campus to stand up for him, or for when the school used a misdeed of Professor Katz from 20 years before, for which he had been punished, a sexual misdeed, as a club to eventually drive him out of there, break tenure. So what good did it do? And that's the thing that I keep wrestling with. When we create campuses where we don't have the voices that challenge, democracy, yeah, but kind of in the worst sense that Plato identified. They're kind of unmoored from principle. And you know, I think about the famous psychological experiment. Jonathan Rauch talks about this one. If you get a group of people together and everybody is saying 2 + 2 = 5, you know, the one dissenter or would-be dissenter feels really challenged. You know, I think that's not right, but very hard to say. You have one more person in the room that will challenge, and there's a huge effect. And what if you have a group of people saying, stop, this is violating our principles? How do we get to that is, in my mind, the most crucial thing we can do for academic freedom. Academic freedom is a privilege. It's not a natural right, although where it converges with the First Amendment, one could argue it's constitutional, but that's a very fine point. How do we keep this privilege as something that the academy deserves? And that's going to take a whole lot more maintenance work, or else it could be used as something really quite dangerous. So it's just going to add one other thing, sex. I just want to get everybody's attention. If you really want to see how dangerous the situation is, look at the trials and tribulations of people like J. Michael Bailey and Alice Dreger, who I love the title of her book, Galileo's Middle Finger, of Lisa Littman, of Carol Hooven. We could do a real, body count here of really great academics who have done really great work, who were ostracized, who lost their privileges of speaking and teaching because there were none to defend them. And that's the dysfunction.
So actually, that's where I wanted to go next. So some aspect of the work that each of you has done kind of overlaps with an identity, whether that's religious, race, gender, yes. And I wonder, it seems to me that in the academy that it's particularly around this constellation of ideas, or it is maybe more than you might expect otherwise around this constellation of ideas that you see, kind of academic freedom in the classroom kind of being threatened, or academic freedom in research being threatened. I wonder, kind of maybe starting with Alexandra, how do you, when you do your work, whether it's teaching or research, how do you see this issue, as it relates to your work, kind of coming up and sort of presenting a challenge to academic freedom?
Oh yes, thank you. And it's particularly related to the previous question you asked about activism in academia. I've been grappling with this. My main study of research is intimate partner violence, and I've looked at women as victims of abuse and children. While I was in Russia, it was a very new topic to look at that. And then I've just realized that it's not just women and children. There are clearly men who are victims of abuse as well. We see that from the service in the United States. I knew Murray Strauss, who was doing these family violence studies. I went to his lab in the University of New Hampshire as a Carnegie Scholar. And this is when he told me, it was back in 2004 and 2005, and he told me, if you want to get tenure ever at some of the universities here in North America, try not to study this topic first. Just do something else, and then when you have a secured place, then you do what you like. I violated that principle, and I paid my price for not getting a job where I really wanted to get a job. But I'm studying male victims now. And the point, I'm doing it in the past 10, 15 years because this is what I really believe the problem is. And I strongly believe with the idea of academic freedom and this kind of privilege and the right we have in academia to ask difficult questions and fill in the gaps. Right, and this is where I've realized that there is a strong opposition among the scholars who are activists, and violence against women is a very serious movement in the West, in North America specifically. And while they do an amazing job, very important job, particularly from the second wave of feminism, radical feminism, did very important job, but within the academia, it's very quickly turned to ideology. It turned to something, then you cannot just ask that question. They called me anti-feminist for simply looking at the experiences of men. So yes, I'm grappling with this and fighting this, and I've decided, no, I'm not going away. I'm staying in this field. And this is what I strongly believe in as an academic. I clearly see it as a criminologist. I interview men, I talking to them, they're crying. During the interviews, they have nowhere else to go. Nobody cares. There is no empathy to them. Nobody considers them as victims. We're doing this job now. They're not going to divert me from that. But the point is that it's constant fight. And even in the field, in my courses, I'm teaching family violence course. What I'm doing, violence and aggression, I'm actually put it on my first page of my syllabus. Every of my syllabi has this: academic freedom, open inquiry and debate. And this is like a value. This is what we do in this course. We discuss difficult questions. I encourage you to express your opinions. I'm not grading you on your opinions, but on the quality of your argument. And then basically this is there. And then in every assignment, I'm asking them to provide at least 2 opposite theories on the same phenomenon. One they like, and then the other one they need to learn that is critical to that opinion, right? So the point is that this is what we're doing, and we've identified ourselves in different countries. I'm in Canada now, in the United States and New Zealand. We kind of got working together in the United Kingdom, but we're staying together because it's hard. We denied grants. Our publications are not always published. They have double standard in like, oh, how do you know male victims do not tell you, how do you know that they tell you truth in their interviews? What kind of question is that? What kind of question is that? And we actually responded saying, would you ask the same question when it comes to female victims of abuse? Clearly double standard, but we need, and the situation, the good news is, since we're in the field in the past 10, 15 years, we're really talking about male victimization. It's changing. Slowly it's changing. It's not that dangerous anymore for our graduate students to get into this topic. And there are awards. There are people who recognize this job. And I'm glad right now I'm called to talk to some feminist groups that who help female victims. And they're saying, could you please come and talk to us and tell us about that other side? We don't know much, but we want to find a connection because some men struggle. And what is particularly important for me is that I find so much support in the indigenous communities in Canada. indigenous communities, they call me and they bring me their communities and they're saying, we're not violence against women, or we don't like this separation. We like when we look at the family, we look at the relationship, and I like that focus, and something that we have to fight in academia as well.
George, do you have some experience? I mean, you talked a little bit about a particular study, but I sort of wonder, like, I mean, you overlap with, race and religion in your work.
Yeah, you're not supposed to talk about race, religion, or politics at home. And I study 2 out of those 3. Yeah. And I have courses in 2 out of those 3. Yeah. So something's wrong with me.
So how do your courses go?
I think they go pretty good. A few years ago, I started announcing my first day of class that my class was not a safe space. If you have the professor who affirms whatever you believe, you really need to drop my course, because I'm going to talk about studies that piss me off, and if I'm not going to save myself from being pissed off, I'm not going to save you from being pissed off either. So that's how I begin my courses. I think I can attest that early in my career, when I was dealing with race and I was talking about things such as racial identity and interracial relationships and social discrimination, it was a lot easier to get published. It's just hard to get published now, some topics I talk about. But as I get older, I just care less. It's sort of like in high school, you care a lot about what people think, and then in college, you care a little bit less. Now, I'm old enough that I don't really care about on the topics that I study. Are there topics I don't touch? There are a couple topics I don't touch at all, because I figure I get enough trouble talking about race and anti-Christian bigotry and stuff. I don't need to bring anything else into my life. So there are things I avoid talking about publicly. I'll tell my wife and a few close friends, here's how I feel about this. But as far as the issues that I study, I'm studying it, and I know what the data says, and so if people don't like it, okay, we can discuss it. If you get mean, then we can move on. But what people think of me is not that important anymore. I think that helps a lot. So other than the fact that it's hard to get published, that's sort of where I'm at right now.
Martha, do you have, your work kind of deals with gender in a variety of ways, maybe with respect to your most recent book. Have you encountered something that makes you worried about academic freedom? And
I would say in my work, I feel like I've enjoyed the academic freedom for the most part that was necessary to publish my findings and share them in class. Yes, there were students who didn't like the certain findings that I shared, or I went against their beliefs, and this was on both the left and the right. I sort of could never win in terms of pleasing people, but I didn't think like George was saying, my job wasn't for the students to like me or like the studies I was sharing with them. But I had moments where the reviewers of a journal article had no real scholarly reasons for rejecting the article, but they didn't like a term I used because I thought it would offend people, or there were moments like that. But for the most part, even with my work where I wrote a book that criticized some components of evolutionary psychology, and evolutionary psychologists had at the time also criticized gender studies scholars, but neither group tried to get the other fired or anything that I knew of. I mean, there were maybe other people who engaged in bad behavior, but the scholars themselves were pretty happy to, in my experience, coexist on campus, which I think is as it should be. I remember once giving a talk at some other campus, and the women's studies director there knew what I worked on and was confiding in me that they were very upset that one of the evolutionary psychology courses on sex differences was listed as one of the courses that you could take to fulfill the women's studies major or minor or whatever it was, and how problematic this was. And I said, why? Well, let them take it. What are you afraid of? I mean, that's ridiculous. So my approach was, most of my colleagues at the time anyway approached it like that. We trusted students to develop the independent minds that we wanted them to to have and judge different and competing ideas, and it was okay that there was a diversity of approaches and viewpoints and so forth. So for the most part, I think that was how we were able to thrive in academia in general, and something that was really good for our students. Again, I think it has changed some. I mean, I feel kind of old now, that was in the 90s, but now I think there is a lot more policing that is being done, and there's a lot more self-censorship, as we know, and we know our students are self-censoring. One student said recently to a colleague of mine, after my colleague said, well, I really wanted to hear what you had to say in class, but you're not talking. And the student admitted that she was self-censoring and she didn't want to disagree with her fellow students. And the instructor reminded her that this was 10% of her grade, so she wasn't going to be able to get above a B if she didn't participate and somehow meaningfully engage. And she said, well, I'd rather have friends than an A.
I want to ask you. I want to ask something related to this.
Oh, okay.
So Michael, from your perch at ACTA, I wonder if you could kind of give a lay of the land. I mean, you can speak to this if you want, but if you could also talk about sort of a lay of the land in terms of where we are with academic freedom. I mean, we're 5 years on from, I think, a period in which academic freedom was under threat. In the kind of summer of 2020, when people talking a lot about the research that people were doing or the teaching that they might have been doing and the appropriateness of that. But what's 5 years on from that, maybe with a different set of issues, kind of more salient. Where are we?
I wish I could say this is. I wish I could say this is ancient history, but let's think about Carol Hooven at Harvard. Had the temerity as a distinguished evolutionary biologist to say that, as sensitive as she is to people's gender choices, that there are two gametes. One is called male and one is called female, and all hell broke loose. And of course, the dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences at Harvard, one Claudine Gay, had nothing to say, as every graduate student refused to work with her over that. None of her colleagues would speak up for her. And of course, just about the same time, a little earlier, we have the trials of Roland Fryer, who had the temerity on the basis of his evidence to point out that no, black people are not more likely to be killed by police. Certainly harassed by police. He was very clear about the data. His colleagues told him, don't publish that. He did, and next thing you know, he's on trial because he made a couple of off-color jokes in his lab. So the issues are very real. We give an award called the Hero of Intellectual Freedom Award, and unfortunately, we're not short on recipients. And I'll just throw out one personal one. Sex, again. My son, who's a psychoanalyst, and I wrote a paper on the erosion of academic freedom in the world of psychoanalysis. We couldn't get this thing published in America. A French journal, La Règle du Jeu, is going to publish it in the French translation. You can, if you ever want to read it, I can send you the English as well. But there are too many third rails that are being put up still. And we have too many administrators who are too afraid to do what the late Robert Zimmer did when Dorian Abbott was facing the mob at University of Chicago because he argued for merit, equality, and fairness. And Robert Zimmer, with a word, said, no, we have this thing called freedom of speech and academic freedom here. No discussion. He's not going to be sanctioned. There are not all that many presidents who have that backbone, and boards need to provide it for them if they don't.
So we're going to kind of start to transition. So if you're thinking about questions, think harder and make sure that you have them ready when we go to pass the mic around. But I wanted to ask people to respond to a kind of question about the future, or thinking about the future in terms of these issues. And so, from where I sit, I think about reform and the constraints on reform, and what is possible, with respect to any number of the issues that we've been talking about today, but academic freedom and the maintenance of it being an important one. And so, we have tenured faculty who have long-term contracts. We have physical buildings that I'm pretty sure they're going to be there. We have, kind of permanent or semi-permanent institutional structures that are that wrap all these things together. And so, Greg Lukianoff yesterday said something about kind of a monoculture that I think is partly contributes to threats to academic freedom. Do you have, do each of you have something that you can do tomorrow, that somebody else can do, as a process of reform in the faculty senate? How do we think about this issue when we face all of these constraints that are kind of, we're not going to get rid of the things that I just described, right? Long-term contracts are going to be there, physical buildings are going to be there. We can rewrite the rules, but how should we rewrite them? Alex, do you want, Alexander?
Yeah, thank you. I do think that the structures are there, and it's fine, let them stand there. The point is that it's about the people who are in those buildings and structures, and I think it's possible to change. I just really want to bring the words of Alexei Navalny, who was killed in prison by the government 2 years ago, and basically his idea was the greatest evil is when the good people do nothing. And Alexander Solzhenitsyn in the archipelago Gulag said the same thing, basically is that an ordinary brave person should not participate in lie. So it's basically the idea is that every time it's about the people who make choice not to speak up when they disagree. It's about these little steps, about individuals who are in the system but choose for some reasons, because of the fear to displease their colleagues or whatever reason, is not to speak up. And I'm seeing it so often in Senate, I'm seeing it so often in faculty meetings. I know people disagree, and to me it's just, I don't know, I stopped respecting some of my colleagues, honestly, because I don't understand what they have to lose. What they have to win, it's a lot. It's protecting the entire institution where they are. If they don't speak up, who do they expect will speak up for them? They're destroying the exact place where they're working. They don't understand the consequences of this silence, right? And that is why I think, yes, institutions are there. It's the culture that we have here in the West. And again, to me, the question, this wonderful conference, and again, I'm so impressed how much here in the United States you're kind of moving ahead. You're already thinking about tomorrow, how to create the new generation of people who will be loving debate, not afraid of the debate, but loving it and knowing how to do it. So we are behind. In Canada, we're so much behind there yet. We're still struggling with DI, with the double down with DI, with indigenization since the last election, since April. We're building a medical school at our university, which is based on indigenous way of knowing, which I have no idea what it is. And we keep asking at Senate, what is it? Please define it to us. And they're still playing these political games. So the point to me, and what we tell you, the question you asked, is just to be there. And I'm thinking faculty participation and governance. Faculty participation and service is important. And I know many of us prefer, of course, teaching and research. We love it. We're doing it. And not that many people like service, but this is what it is. This is where we have to find the way to encourage people to go there and participate in collegial governance. Go to Board of Governors, to the Senate, sit there and ask the question. And that's the only way. And this is why we hear some of our members, we check every policy they create, every document. And we ask these questions over and over again. And I know it's a slow change, but this is the only way I see how we can change the system.
Martha, I want you to speak to the same question, but I wonder if you could also provide some context from the University of Wyoming, where I know that the president has a number of different kind of initiatives for how he thinks about and how he sort of deploys resources for thinking about some of these issues.
Yeah, thanks. So at the University of Wyoming, President Ed Seidel created an initiative on free expression, intellectual freedom, and constructive dialogue. It actually also includes academic freedom and institutional neutrality, so there's really 5 themes that we work on. Got a lot of campus buy-in in 2023 and have been working on implementing ways to operationalize those principles, and we've got the University of Wyoming statement that articulates the principles, but we want to operationalize them by, and we've been re-examining policies and procedures so that academic freedom isn't trampled on and so forth, and the free expression rights are honored. And then we are looking at how we communicate those principles to prospective students and their family members, and to current students, and to faculty and staff, and members of the public, and how we practice those as well. So we're trying to invest in resources that give students opportunities to become confident pluralists, where students can practice facilitation and dialogue, and in general, just sort of see that modeled, and we're hoping that the faculty will do more as well. We're offering faculty development workshops, and I think it's something that faculty can really do is to develop techniques to be more clear and transparent in their syllabi about what the course is about, what the point is, why they're doing these activities and assignments, and so forth. There's a lot of faculty members who I talk to who who want to follow the rules or don't want to upset anyone, and they're trying to have integrity, and they want to have intellectual humility and everything else that we might value, but they're not sure exactly how. They're scared. They're scared that their students are going to file a complaint against them. They're scared that there's going to be an investigation against them, either because they're seen by the right-leaning people as too political, or they're seen by the left-leaning people as too political. So there's a lot of fear. So I think that working with faculty has been really important to address those fears and to empower them with some strategies for being clear about their purpose so as to avoid misunderstandings, letting people, students or others, guess as to what they're up to. And that has, I think, been really useful. I think there's other things that faculty members are doing across the country as well, like a sociologist and member of HXA, Yuka Salvanane, and a couple of colleagues took over the editorship of a journal in sociology, a major journal, and they're opening it to more of a variety of points of view that hadn't been open that way before. So there are things that faculty members can do by participating in their disciplinary associations and in initiating some modifications or even radical changes. So I think I have hope. And of course, one of my big things is I tell scholars to stop calling themselves scholar activists. I don't think many of them even are activists. It's just a popular label, and they feel good about their work by calling themselves scholar activists. It somehow makes them feel like they're, I think, doing something useful. And so I say, maybe think of yourself as a scholar optimist. You want to help cure cancer, sure, or solve the problem of interpersonal violence, or whatever it may be. But you're not doing that by being an activist. You're doing that by with faithful adherence to the methods in your discipline. So, George, I want you to speak to the question, but I wonder, as you ponder your answer, we've heard a lot from people at sort of so-called elite universities. We've heard from people at public universities, and I wonder if there's a lesson that those places can learn from a religious institution. You have your particular, they have their particular approach to faculty governance, and maybe there's something that that we're not doing over in this other space that you don't have to speak to that if there's nothing, but maybe there is.
Yeah, I think I think that the religious institutions are doing just as lousy of a job as everyone else overall. As far as governance and these sort of things. And yes, there does tend to be more political freedoms, but there's also pressures in other ways. So I'm not going to hold up Baylor as, overall we're more tolerant than others. I think that we are in certain ways and not in other ways. I do know there's research that says that whenever you're in a position where everyone agrees with you, you become more confident that you're right. You become overconfident that you're right. So I do wonder the value if we could just get just one person who would be willing to speak up into a department or a faculty, I think just having just, at least, I mean, obviously you don't want to be the only person, but, oh wait. He was on just a second ago, I was like, you don't want to be the single person, but if you're willing to speak up, then, you know, you're not going to change everyone's minds, but it forces people to moderate their arguments. You can't go as extreme when there's someone who's going to disagree, because they're going to point out the issues that are there. And so to the degree that we can do that, then I think that we will at least ameliorate some of the issues that are there. It's not, I mean, a lot of stuff that everyone else has discussed, like how administration can do civic education, stuff like that. You know, I think that's wonderful. But as far as an individual, I try to be willing to speak up whenever I think that there's been a situation. Well, just one example. About 10 years ago, we were looking at graduate students and people who are coming into our graduate program at University of Texas. And one of the professors said, "Oh, this guy got this degree from," and he named this Christian college. "Is he right for us?" I said, "Well, you can't do that. You know, you realize if you do that, if that becomes part of the record, then he could sue, you know, and it found out he could sue you for religious discrimination." And so that sort of opened up his eyes. And so, you know, just being able to speak out on stuff like that is, you know, I think, you know, you're not going to change everyone's minds, but maybe you can lessen some of the, you know, humanize the opposition, if you will, or people just dissent. I think that's very, very valuable.
Great. So Michael, we'll open it up after Michael gets a chance to respond. But I didn't know actually that you were an architect of the language in Regent Law, or one of the architects of that. And I guess I don't want you to end too pessimistically, so you might have to kind of add something after you answer my question. But I wouldn't say that it seems to be working. I mean, you know, there's a protection. I mean, it's a very strong protection, as stated, for political philosophy. But I don't think it's working. And I wonder if, I mean, there must be something about the culture. It must be something about the way the bureaucracy dilutes, you know, what that protection is supposed to do. Can you say something about that? And then maybe end on an optimistic note?
Well, you know, the old phrase, personnel is policy, and I've spoken already about the need to take conscious steps. Even a true meritocratic hiring process, you know, where we get rid of confirmation bias and things of that nature would help. But there is something just utterly skewed when you find so few classical liberals and so few conservatives on a faculty. That doesn't happen without a certain amount of what I would call mens rea. This is not done in a way that is innocent. And so leadership has to take a role in turning that around. And, you know, it's a great thing to have a Benson Center, but this ought to be something that's spread throughout the university, that people can find mentors. You know, one of the most elegiac things I've read in a long time was Harvey Mansfield, when asked by the Wall Street Journal, "Will there ever be ones like you at Harvard?" He said, "No, because there is no opportunity for young people who share my particular vision to get onto the track." And of course, I had the joy of working with Donald Kagan when I was an undergraduate. Will we have another generation of these sorts of leaders? Not without some real intervention. So, yes, I'm glad that it is in the statute, because it can be at least then referenced and used. But people matter in these things. You know, I'd go all the way back to the Casey Johnson tenure case at the earlier part of the century. His colleagues unanimously voted against this really distinguished scholar and teacher because they didn't like him challenging gender-based hiring practices, or a panel after September 11th that seemed to be solely a justification for the attack. And fortunately, there were enough people around the country, major historians, and my organization played a role in that that cried foul, and Matt Goldstein, the chancellor, rejected that decision. But none of the culprits were punished for saying that they were rejecting him because of lack of collegiality. What is it, a damned country club? But, you know, we've got to clean up our act. So something positive. I brought along a little document, you can find copies of it on the table, called the Gold Standard for Freedom of Expression. And two things on that I particularly want to stress. One is institutional neutrality, but it's got to drill down all the way to the department level. When a department declares this is what we believe, well, of course it's going to chill students and faculty. And that's practice that leadership needs to really stop and say, no, this is not your academic freedom. This is your attempt to subvert academic freedom. There's no Lehrfreiheit or Lernenfreiheit there, freedom to teach or freedom to learn. So let's stop hiding behind this freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. We're going to have a real academic freedom. And the other is changing the orientation programs. Every school ought to be having a Purdue Mitch Daniels-like orientation about what the values are of the institution. Start changing the culture from the ground up. So yeah, take the gold standard along and lobby for it wherever you get the chance.
All right. Yeah, get the panel in. So we'll open it up to questions, and I'll hand my mic to the first question, and then we'll go from there.
So this is really a foundational question. I'm going to go back to the very beginning when you were asked the mission of higher education, and you said truth, and the three of you, I think, said knowledge, right? The founders said that for our nation to continue, we had to have an educated and a virtuous populace. At the Air Force Academy, there is the Center for Character and Leadership Development, and I understand that it's really hard to define character in a way that everyone can get on board. But if it's true that we can only continue with an educated and virtuous populace, where is the place for virtue in higher education? If you look at the mission statement of Harvard way back in the 16 whatever when they started, it was so much more robust than what I see in the universities today. So my question is, where is the place for virtue in higher education?
Somebody want to?
Maybe I'll start. I'm not quite sure what you understand by virtue, what exactly that means, because my university specifically has in addition to obtaining knowledge and advancing knowledge, it actually has some virtue signaling things in the way that it should be equity, diversity, inclusion. This is part of our mission of the university now. And this is where it becomes problematic, because we all disagree on these things. They even chose the word equity over equality. And they understand diversity very narrowly. But they see it as something that they will also be part of the mission of our university now. So that is why here I'm not quite sure. I would love to see virtue. And here I would actually agree with Shiloh when he said that he doesn't know who the students will be when he puts all this knowledge in them. We cannot guarantee they will be patriots or they will be Democrats or Republicans or whatever, because then they will become, we give them the best, we give them the skills to learn about the world in the best and open way, to have the debate and hear other points of view, and then whoever they are, and they decide on these values in their life later. Maybe just because in my university it's so many values that they're pushing on us and imposing on us, and they treat them as actually, they even use the word honor. They say you have to honor indigenization at the university, honor DEI. And the point is that this is what we at Senate saying, we don't have to honor that. We may study this as a subject of research, but we don't have to worship it. We're against taking it as a value, at face value, without questioning it. This is why we at the university, that is why, this is where I'm very careful about kind of value system there.
I think here is where a religious school has some advantage in that Baylor could say part of our virtue is to live a Christian life and that sort of stuff. But I think it's really hard if you get outside of that because we're such a multicultural society that, for example, we say freedom's our virtue. Well, what does that mean? It means different things to different people. Honor's our virtue. It means different things to different people. So I think if you kept it at the 30,000-foot level, things like nebulous honesty, even integrity means different things to different people. But yeah, I think honesty maybe you could get away with, but it is very, very hard. And then if you keep it at that level, how do you promote it more specifically? So I'm not against virtue, but I just think we have to be sensitive in a multicultural society. If you have a school that specializes in something like a religious school, that's one thing. But if you have a school that's for everyone, that I think it becomes very difficult to phrase it in a way where everyone's going to agree, oh yeah, that is virtuous.
Okay, but what did the founders mean? How do we reconcile?
I think the founders had a different society though. The founders had a more monocultural society, so it's easier for them to do that. I think we don't have that society any longer.
Well, I was going to add, if I may, just quickly, I know I'm putting a lot of weight on that word truth, but if students go about their work with academic integrity, honesty, in an environment that expects nothing less, a willingness to share and to be open in that pursuit of truth, they're getting some pretty good character education. And obviously there are guardrails that you put up about, well, yes, not allowing plagiarism. I'm kind of thinking about the former president of Harvard, or student misconduct. I think the pursuit of truth gets us pretty close, but I take your question very seriously. Is it sufficient?
Thank you for another great panel. And my question is actually related because I kept hearing the words fear and courage. And other than being role models, which all of you are, how do we teach courage? And I want to give an example where this arose. Michael referred to Roland Fryer, who clearly exhibited courage, and we've heard him speak a couple of times, most recently at Columbia, where he talked about how not a single member of the Harvard faculty spoke up for him. Even behind, usually Josh had the experience of people would say to him privately, I really support you, they wouldn't say it publicly. Roland said nobody did it at all. He felt totally bereft. And as we were strategizing, this is a Columbia Academic Freedom Council, about how we could improve the situation. There was a lot of discussion about changing structures and policies and orientation and all these wonderful ideas, but somebody said this really comes down to courage and character. And how do we teach that other than modeling it yourselves?
Why do we get all the hard questions?
Well, I can give the kind of anti-type when the students were mobbing Nicholas Christakis in that absolutely outrageous way. Yale University, my alma mater, gave leadership awards to two of the students hurling obscenities at this distinguished scholar. So maybe let's flip that on its head. Where is the leadership of universities that will actually not just protect, but lionize and promote the kind of leadership that would stand up. Or indeed, kind of call into account the deanlets who refused to do that. The same thing happened with Carol Hooven. Nobody in her department was willing to say, okay, graduate students, you don't want to work with her? Well, maybe you're not going to work with anybody in our department. Grow up, kids. Where was that? Where was Bobo or Claudine Gay to say, no, this is not the way we would behave? Why was the late Robert Zimmer, may he rest in peace, may a blessed memory? Why don't we have more like that? We have some, like Daniel Diermeyer at Vanderbilt. And the onus goes back to boards. Start choosing people who are willing to be as afraid of violating their principles as they are of offending a faculty pressure group.
I guess this also kind of plays off your first question about the mission of universities. I imagine a lot of people know Jonathan Haidt's speech about the telos of the university, the purpose of the university. It made the argument of, you could pursue truth or social justice, but not both. And that sparked a whole, a lot of different kind of arguments. Heterodox has a blog kind of about this. I think it's a useful conversation. And with that first question, we did get pursuit of truth and then the discovery and dissemination of information. And there are a couple questions embedded in this. So I agree with the importance of the pursuit of truth, and I do think pursuit of is an important part of that we can get into, right? Because we're not, especially on the liberal arts side, we're not finding that much truth, but the pursuit of truth is the pursuit of an unreachable ideal is still useful. But I also see that as necessary but not sufficient in our world for two big reasons that I'd be curious how you respond. One is, if we're focused on just producing knowledge and then getting it out into a marketplace of ideas where quality knowledge doesn't seem to have very many natural advantages, like Rand's Institute report on the truth decay, right? That we have so much misinformation and disinformation that if we're just focusing on, we're just going to put out some good products out there, but if those products never sell, then, so I guess this turns into a question, what is the role of universities in the marketplace of ideas, right? But then the second pushback I would give on focusing primarily just on truth is a lot of my work is on wicked problems and these, the bigger issues we have, we need a lot more knowledge to help us engage those issues, but those issues always fall back to tough value choices in a pluralistic society. And if we're just focusing on discovering truth, it's not going to get us all that we need to make these really tough decisions together about how do we address our shared problems. So my answer to what the telos of the university is cultivating wisdom, which I think incorporates the pursuit of truth kind of within that. But it's fascinating how, we talked about this a little bit yesterday, right? But the words wisdom and judgment, about 5 years ago, I looked at a lot of university missions and just did not see those words anywhere. So I'm curious how would y'all respond to that? Where's the role of wisdom in cultivating wisdom? And maybe that incorporates some of the character education kind of as well in there.
If I could, just a very quick response to that. We talked about AAUP. In the 1915 document, Arthur Lovejoy with input from John Dewey, magisterial, beautiful language about how the professor should be a person of fair-minded and unbiased disposition. I'm just paraphrasing it. And should be on his guard, this was all male, of course, on his guard about taking advantage of the immaturity of students to indoctrinate them before they had a chance to develop their own opinions on the basis of evidence and the basis of knowledge. But that document was written with a view to the public. How do we convince the public that we deserve academic freedom? And it comes from our behavior, our fair-mindedness, our objectivity. And every time we get an activist professor who feels, no, this is my podium, I'm preaching, we're chipping out the foundation that would lead to that respect for wisdom.
Yeah, I just really like that. I really like that, and I think it might be a mission of the university as well. This is amazing because the idea is to equip the students with the idea how to learn about the world, how to look at the world openly, and maybe that would, I mean, this is civics education partly. The idea is to educate about the debate as a part of life, so trying to address this polarization that is happening in so many societies today. So I really like that language as well.
I just agree, and I've heard Martine give a great presentation on this very thing, and I'm convinced, and I think that for land-grant institutions like University of Wyoming, there's long been a real sense that you're also serving the state and region, and we do want to apply our knowledge and be engaged scholars, and I think that in too many instances on a lot of campuses, that approach has just slid into this social justice pursuit. And I think we really need to find our way back to something where we can be engaged on the basis of our expertise and serve the public in ways that are responsible without pushing a particular political agenda as we do it. And so maybe this idea of, did you call it wisdom? And where we're trying to help people develop some ability to make decisions and solve problems together amid competing values is a really important part of what we want to help them do. And I think there's more programs springing up that help students and faculty do that better.
I think that if we did a better job teaching critical thinking, the wisdom would follow from that. That critical thinking leads to wisdom. So I think part of it is that we've not done a good job of critical thinking. We've given them what they're supposed to learn, and you don't get wisdom from that. You get wisdom from wrestling with it and thinking through things and questioning things they hadn't questioned before. The first part of your question on, how do you deal with misinformation? At one point the university was the screen that could be counted on. But unfortunately, and I just gave an example, people learn not to trust that screen. So if we get back to having, a search for the truth that incorporates different viewpoints and we test it all, we can become that screen. But if we're going to say, no, this is what you have to believe because this is my presupposition, we'll never be that screen. And we can't screen out, the things that are truly misinformation.
I really appreciate this last question. I'm a Unitarian Universalist minister. And yesterday after the First Amendment thing, I just was so disturbed. I'm like, it is protected to be cruel and hateful in this country. And what about our values? What about our character? What about our wisdom? And where is that in the conversation of what's protected, right? We have this explosion of lack of character, what I would call lack of character, and that's protected. And then, so, of course, my religious self, my spiritual self, my psychological self says, well, where's the good boundaries? Thank you. Somebody agrees with me. That's awesome. Where are the good boundaries around acceptable human behavior? It's just such a conundrum. And, how do we address that? And I do think, we can address that in houses of worship, for sure. And that's part of my job to address that. But I also think, building character and building wisdom and the capacity to look at what's happening to our culture and who we are as human beings is part of what we do in academia. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Can I mention one thing that I found was really painful for the students at the University of Wyoming was when the Student Government Association was going to vote on whether or not to adopt or endorse the University of Wyoming Statement of Principles. And that was the closest vote of all of the different groups on campus that voted. It won or passed by one vote. And I sat throughout the, 3-hour meeting where the students debated it. And their big concern was that if we championed free expression rights on campus, we would be letting students and everyone else know that you can just go ahead and be a meanie McMean pants. No one's going to care. We don't care how. And they admirably cared about their community. So it was very painful for them to sort that out. And again, a lot of the students voted against the principles because they thought that it would ruin the community. And we've had to try really hard to talk about, one, as a state university, it's not like as an option for us to ignore the First Amendment. I mean, it's a constitutional right. So we're not going to go against that anyway. But we also really try to emphasize that confidence with pluralism, the constructive dialogue skills, and we talk about those as values, and we talk about free expression as a principle. Because in the end, if someone's offended by what someone says and says it's mean, if they have a free expression right to say it, we're still going to go with their free expression right. But we don't think it means you can't tell students how to be constructive. And I forgot to say this before, but let me just mention there's University of Wyoming postcards on that back book table, and there's a QR code that goes to a short video, and it's the video that we show all of our new students at New Student Orientation. Tries to capture some of this and make it into a point of pride rather than a sense that it's a loss. But it's a hard challenge.
If I could say something on that, I think I can't speak to the broader culture and character in the broader culture. Universities play a role, but they're not the only factor that determines that. Within the university, there's employment law that governs how we treat each other, and we should obey the law. But I think also that being a university professor is not for the faint of heart. I think that it seems like it sometimes, and we have pretty cushy jobs, or however we're perceived by the public. But I once had a colleague tell me, we're paid. You're paid so that you stick it out when people disagree with you. Right? That's why we are paid. That's why we have the privileges that we have, as Michael put it earlier. So how that affects the broader culture, but for professors and then for the students in those environments, I think that's why you're there. And you're not there to be bullied, and you're not there to be treated with disrespect that's not consistent with American law. But other than that, welcome. This is the university.
I would like to add to this. I completely agree, and I think authoritarian regimes provide this kind of warning, just because in those regimes there is this overarching idea who we know what kind of person we would like to get, and they have very clear messages on loyalty, patriotism. They shape in a certain type of the individual, and that's dangerous. That is why I appreciate so much the climate in the Western academia where, there are rules. You have to follow the rules. There are procedures within the universities. There are laws, but that's it. Then it's just this diversity of opinions, diversity of individuals with their approaches, thoughts, ideas, disagreements. It's just the principles of the open debate are important. And then the just uniqueness of all of these people, which is the richness of it all.
The C. Van Woodward report of 1975 is really worth revisiting. It recognizes that shock, hurt, and anger are not things to be taken lightly in any community, but that the academic community is a very special community where you can think the unthinkable, discuss the unmentionable, and challenge the unchallengeable. So there will always be some tension there, but it does leave room for what Harvard's past president Larry Summers articulated so beautifully: moral leadership. That doesn't mean a violation of institutional neutrality, but it does mean moral leadership. And those things can really sit together. So I totally agree. We do not want a campus that simply roils in anger and foolish exchange. But on the other hand, we do have to recognize the fact that we have no constitutional right, I'm here channeling Mitch Daniels, not to be offended. We simply have to develop the resilience to argue back.
I wonder, again. I also wonder if one of the reasons why there's a push towards limiting certain speeches, we've not taught people how to have collaborative conversations with each other. You know, with my kids, you know, I have restraint on them, but I also have to start letting them go, because the more I restrain them, the less they're going to be able to grow. But the strength is there. There are certain things you cannot say, but the more we restrain it without teaching them how to have better conversations, because you know we could have all these things they can't say. All it's going to do is drive it underground, and it'll come up in the most inopportune time. So I think there is a balance, but I would rather the balance be more in trying to teach people how to have conversations with each other than telling them what not to say.
Any other questions? All right. Well, let's thank the panel, and Steve will come up and...
Perhaps one more round of applause both for this panel, but for all of our panelists throughout that. You guys are welcome to stay up here. I was going to give some concluding remarks. You can stay, you can go. Okay. Hopefully you guys can hear me over the rain here. I actually want to begin. I'm just going to say a few concluding remarks. I'm not going to go long on you. I wanted to just start again by thanking our sponsors. So Rocky Mountain PBS, Fire, Utah Valley, the Benson Center, the Woodford Foundation. None of this would have been possible without them, so sweet. And I'll try to go with the weather and quash any good feelings we have before we leave by talking about money just a little bit. And just to say that this conference, those sponsors, and actually some money we had from the CU system for a civics initiative from a number of years ago, made this conference possible. But it is a highly subsidized conference, right? It's highly, like, the ticket sales that we're getting from this conference will cover less than a quarter of what it costs. So you can leave with a lot of guilt. No, but I bring that up because, you know, I think this could be one of several of these sorts of gatherings. I know that we've spent a lot of time talking about higher ed, education and higher ed in particular at this conference. And I know, looking at the list, that there's plenty of you who that's not even your sector, right? That's not even your industry. I think we should actually extend some gratitude for 2 full days of more or less listening about that. I think that these same concepts, these same ideas, civil discourse, but also an understanding of civics and how our system works, applies to the nonprofit sector, to the corporate world, right? To those of you who actually are elected officials or are working in local government. And if we do have future gatherings, I imagine we can bring those sorts of panels in as well. I think we also see, though, that a lot of it does start with education. Education earlier than higher education as well, that we have to start instilling these things early to make things work in all those sectors I just mentioned later on. So I hope we can do this again. I'll also use that as a plug for CSGI. Please, if you do nothing else, go to CSGI.co, get on our mailing list. We're going to be doing more programming like this. We'd love to see you all at those sorts of events. And then in terms of my concluding remarks, my plan before the conference was I would give my opening remarks, then I would, kind of watch how the conference is going, and then think about how I might recap it and sort of integrate it in with the conference theme and the opening remarks. And I pulled out my computer this morning a little bit to try to do that, and I said, I don't think this really makes sense. It doesn't make sense for a couple of reasons. One, I would just be giving you a rerun of what you had heard, and inevitably I'd be leaving some important things out. But number two, I'm not sure this conference really needs a closing or closing remarks, because I think the whole spirit of the conference is much more an opening, right? An opening in all these different ways that we actually practice. There's practices we have to relearn. The practice of civil discourse. There's concepts, principles, and ideas that we have to come back to and recover, which we've talked about as well, right? These basic ideas, the basic civic ideas. So I figured the best way to do that is just for all of us to go out and try. So I figured what I'd do instead is just share one thing about my experience in organizing this conference. Can everyone hear me, by the way? Because it is just so loud out there. Okay. So, many of you probably know that academics don't actually necessarily seek out the spotlight like this. We have a lot of academics. We get to spend some time up here on the stage. It feels nice to be listened to. We like to be listened to in our classrooms as well. But one of the reasons that we get into it is you kind of like to go to your office, have nobody really bother you, not answer that many emails, right? Not be forced into that many meetings or conversations. That was very much my intent when I became an academic. I did not think that I would be doing in this job or doing this 10 years ago. And organizing this conference has actually been a civic education for me. I could be a little inward, doing my own thing, not really wanting to worry about what's out there. When I took on the task, though, and started to do this, it just inevitably led to meetings with all sorts of folks, right? All sorts of folks in Colorado, all sorts of folks in Colorado Springs. And I met a lot of these people and just watched them. They're doing things, and whatever, it could be Braver Angels, it could be the Denver Public School District, it could be Colorado Mountain College, but they're all trying to just make Colorado a better place, make the nation a better place in whatever way they are. And I do feel like it kind of, enlivened something in me too. It made me feel a little bit better about these efforts. Maybe not be so cynical and inward myself, be a little more civically minded and think about the ways that I can make a difference or try to help, or that CSGI can with, it's not me, right? It's all these people who are part of CSGI and everyone here. So it wasn't like a natural drive for me, but it's something that I think brought me closer to the community, made me think a little bit more about being engaged and being more civically minded. So it was a pleasure for that to happen. And hopefully this meeting, which is maybe not the last, can help us all do that a little bit more. So with that, I would like to just say thank you for coming. It's going to be a wonderful walk to your car. But thank you for everybody who's been here. It was, bringing all these speakers from all over the country. The list we were able to, the speakers we were able to get, I don't think that it was guaranteed. I think it really came together. I'm really, really proud of it and happy with it. I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope we get to do something like this in the future again. Thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your time.